Taylor Schabusiness. Taylor Schabusiness was just 24 years old when she committed one of the most gruesome murders in Wisconsin history. But it wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the public, it was her behavior afterward. In court, Taylor showed no signs of guilt. She smirked, laughed, and at one point even physically attacked her own attorney. Her disturbing lack of remorse made her case infamous and landed her on the list of killers who showed absolutely no regret. On February 23, 2022, police in Green Bay, Wisconsin responded to a horrifying 911 call from a woman who said she had found a severed human head in a bucket in her basement. The woman was the mother of Shad Thierry, a 25-year-old man who had recently been dating Taylor Schabusiness. Officers quickly identified Shad as the victim and Taylor as the last person seen with him. The details that followed were almost too graphic to believe. According to investigators, Taylor and Shad had begun using drugs together when things took a dark turn. During intimacy, she began strangling him with a chain and then kept choking him for over 5 minutes until he died. But it didn't end there. Taylor later told police she liked it and decided to keep going. She then used a knife to dismember his body, placing various parts in bags, boxes, and even a crock pot. The severed head was left in a bucket near the basement stairs. When officers found Taylor later that night, her clothes were stained with blood, and she calmly admitted everything. Taylor was found at a friend's house the next day, high and laughing. When police asked where Shad's body was, she casually told them she explained she didn't mean to kill him, but then laughed and said she had fun doing it. Investigators noted that she showed no emotion during the interview. She was calm, detached, and even joking about what had happened. Taylor was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and third-degree. Her trial was delayed several times as attorneys debated whether she was mentally competent to stand trial. Psychologists gave conflicting reports, but ultimately a judge ruled she knew right from wrong and could be tried. In court, prosecutors presented gruesome evidence. Photos of the crime scene, a recorded confession, and the disturbing items found at Shad's house. Taylor's defense team tried to argue she was insane at the time of the murder, but the jury didn't buy it. They took less than an hour to find her guilty on all counts. In July 2023, Taylor Schabusiness was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge said her actions showed total disregard for human life and that the crime was so brutal, no other sentence would be appropriate. Shad's family, particularly his father and uncle, gave emotional statements. They said he didn't deserve what happened and begged the court to ensure Taylor never walked free again. The courtroom was silent, except for Taylor. Throughout her court appearance, Taylor Schabusiness was openly mocking, disruptive, and violent. She smiled and laughed during hearings, especially when the crime scene was described. She rolled her eyes when the victim's family spoke and whispered comments to herself while prosecutors laid out the timeline. But the most shocking moment came in February 2023, during a pre-trial hearing. As her defense attorney tried to delay proceedings, Taylor suddenly turned and attacked him, knocking him to the floor. Deputies had to wrestle her into a restrained chair as she screamed across the courtroom. In another appearance, she was seen grinning when the judge listed the items found at the crime scene, like the bucket, knives, and the bags. Her attitude never changed. From arrest to conviction, she acted more amused than sorry. Even after her life sentence, she made no apology and showed no remorse. Instead, she left behind a courtroom full of people horrified. Dalia Dippolito. Dalia Dippolito looked like someone who had it all together. She was young, attractive, and living in sunny South Florida with her new husband. But what most people didn't see was what was happening behind closed doors. It all started when Dalia secretly met with someone she believed was a hitman. She wanted to have her husband, Michael Dippolito, dead, and she was serious about it. She offered $7,000 to have him killed and even gave details about when and where it should happen. But what Dalia didn't know was that the hitman she was talking to was actually an undercover police officer. The man had been tipped off by one of Dalia's ex-boyfriends, who said he had been planning something dangerous. So the police set up a sting. They wired the fake hitman with microphone and hidden camera. They recorded Dalia making the deal. She didn't hold back. On video, she calmly said she was 5,000% sure she wanted her husband dead. A few days later, police seized a fake crime scene outside the couple's home. They called Dalia and told her her husband had been murdered. Cameras were rolling when she showed up, crying and acting shocked, but the entire thing was a setup. Moments later, police took her to the station and told her the truth. Michael was alive and she had been caught on tape trying to have him killed. The video of her fake reaction and her cold, calm planning with the fake hitman quickly went viral. I was shared on news sites, talk shows, and even ended up in reality TV shows. People couldn't believe what they were watching. Dalia's case went to trial in 2011, and it didn't go well for her. The jury saw the video of her sitting in a car, casually discussing her husband's murder. The defense argued that it was all part of a planned video for a reality show and that it wasn't serious, but the jury didn't buy it. She was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison, but the story didn't end there. Her conviction was later thrown out due to legal issues, and she was granted a new trial. In her second trial in 2016, the jury couldn't reach a decision, but during her third trial in 2017, she was once again found guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder. This time, the judge sentenced Dalia 16 years in prison. She's still behind bars today, serving her sentence in Florida. Michael Dippolito, the man she tried to have killed, survived it all and said he couldn't believe someone he loved could turn on him like that. Dalia has always claimed she was set up, and her legal team says she never really wanted her husband dead. But the video evidence and her own words tell a very different story. Lucy Letby. Lucy Letby was a young neonatal nurse trusted with the most fragile lives. But when a wave of unexplained infant deaths swept through the hospital where she worked, investigators uncovered a pattern that pointed straight to her. Between 2015 and 2016, a series of unexplained deaths and medical collapses plagued the neonatal unit at Countess of Chester Hospital in England. Babies who were stable suddenly went into cardiac arrest. Some had mysterious errors in their bloodstreams, others had severe insulin drops, or unexplained bleeding. Behind the scenes, a pattern was forming. Each incident occurred when the shifts of Lucy Letby, a 25-year-old neonatal nurse. She had no prior history of violence, no known issues. But as deaths increased, staff became suspicious. How could so many healthy infants suddenly die under one nurse's care? It took years to connect the dots. In 2018, police launched an investigation after hospital staff raised serious concerns. In 2019, Lucy Letby was arrested for the first time but released pending further evidence. It wasn't until 2020 that she was rearrested and formally charged. Investigators uncovered handwritten notes in her home. One read, "I'm evil, I did this." It was chilling. Alongside that, police found medical records and disturbing searches on her computer. She was charged with the death of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 more. Her trial began in 2022 and lasted nearly 10 months, one of the longest in UK history. The prosecution described her as calculating and cold, someone who intentionally harmed the most vulnerable patients. They said she injected air, poisoned babies with insulin, and even tampered with feeding tubes. Letby denied all charges, claiming she was being blamed for hospital failings. But the evidence was overwhelming. Medical data, nurse logs, her own words. The courtroom was packed with grieving families who had waited years for justice. In August 2023, Lucy Letby was found guilty on 14 of the 22 charges. The judge called her actions a cruel, calculated campaign of child murder. He sentenced her to life in prison with no chance of parole, the harshest punishment available in the UK. Letby became the 4th woman in British history to receive such a sentence. Cameo Gamet. Cameo Gamet was a 31-year-old woman from Jackson, Michigan, living with her boyfriend, Marcel Hill. But behind closed doors, the relationship was toxic, full of fights, police calls, and protection orders. In May 2013, it ended in murder. Cameo attacked Marcel while he slept, beating and stabbing him to death in a fit of rage. But what truly shocked the public came later, when she sat in court laughing, smirking, and mocking the victim's family during sentencing. It was a chilling display of zero remorse. On the night of May 17, 2013, police responded to the apartment Cameo shared with Marcel. What they found inside was horrifying. Marcel Hill had been bludgeoned and stabbed repeatedly. The autopsy revealed over 70 injuries, including blunt force trauma to his head and multiple deep stab wounds. Investigators determined Cameo had used a floor lamp, a kitchen knife, and a frying pan during the attack. Blood was splattered across the walls, floor, and ceiling, a sign of how prolonged and violent the beating had been. Marcel had been killed while trying to crawl away. According to prosecutors, the murder was triggered by an argument over a text message Cameo saw on Marcel's phone. But given the level of force and brutality, this wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment fight. It was overkill. When police arrived, Cameo showed no visible distress. She initially claimed that Marcel had attacked her and that she acted in self-defense, but her injuries didn't match her story, and the scene told a different story entirely. Marcel had been unarmed and lying in bed when the attack began. Cameo was arrested on the spot and charged with open murder. Her calm demeanor and conflicting statements immediately raised red flags for investigators. Cameo's trial took place in 2014. The prosecution presented overwhelming physical evidence, including blood patterns, the weapons used, and the sheer number of wounds. Photos of the crime scene were described as some of the worst investigators had ever seen. The jury heard from neighbors who testified that they heard Marcel screaming for help before the noise went silent. The defense tried to paint the case as mutual violence in a troubled relationship, but the level of brutality made that hard to believe. After a swift guilty verdict, the court moved to sentencing. Cameo was facing life in prison without parole. The victim's family gave emotional impact statements, describing Marcel as a gentle, kind man who didn't deserve to die in such a brutal way. But instead of showing remorse, Cameo stared ahead blankly, until it was her turn to speak. What followed was a display that left the entire courtroom stunned. As the victim's aunt begged the court for justice, Cameo rolled her eyes, laughed, and cut her off mid-sentence, saying, "Y'all act like he was a saint." When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she replied with a smirk, "No, I'm straight." Her entire demeanor was cold, defiant, and completely lacking in empathy. The judge, visibly furious, called her a monster and said, "I hope you die in prison." He added that her behavior was amongst the worst he'd ever seen in a courtroom. It wasn't just a crime that disturbed the public. It was the attitude she carried after it. No apology, no regret, just smug defiance. To this day, Cameo Gamet remains in a Michigan prison serving life without parole. Tiffany Cole. Tiffany Cole didn't grow up in a violent home or have a troubled past. In fact, she seemed like a regular woman from South Carolina. But in 2005, she became part of one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking crimes Florida had seen in years. What started as a visit to old family friends ended in a double murder. A shocking plan fueled by greed. In 2005, Tiffany Cole and her boyfriend, Michael Jackson, not the singer, drove from South Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. They were visiting a couple named Carol and Reggie Sumner, two kind-hearted retirees in their 60s. The Sumners had once sold Tiffany's father a car and even let her stay with them for a while. They trusted her. But Tiffany and her boyfriend weren't there to catch up. They had a dark plan. Along with two other men, Bruce Nixon and Alan Reed, they decided to rob the elderly couple and kill them afterwards so that they couldn't be identified. On the night of July 8th, they forced their way into the Sumners' home, tied them up, and made them give up their ATM PIN numbers. Then, in a terrifying and cruel act, they put the couple in the trunk of their own car, still alive, and drove them to a remote area in Georgia. There, they dug a shallow grave before putting the couple inside the trunk. Once they arrived, they buried the Sumners alive, where they were still tied up and helpless. It was one of the most brutal parts of the case. The couples suffocated underground, together. After the murders, Tiffany and the group started pulling money from the Sumners' bank account, nearly $1,000 a day. They used the stolen cash to buy hotel rooms, fast food, and even a car. But their spending spree didn't last long. Police quickly connected the missing couple to their bank withdrawals. Surveillance cameras caught the group at various ATMs and witnesses came forward. Within days, all four suspects were arrested. Tiffany admitted she had bought the duct tape and shovel used in the crime, and that she was part of the plan. She claimed she didn't actually kill the couple herself, but investigators saw her as deeply involved. In court, prosecutors didn't hold back. They said Tiffany Cole played a key role, helping plan the kidnapping, buying the supplies, and staying involved through every step. Even though she didn't physically bury the Sumners, her participation made her just as responsible. The jury agreed. In 2007, Tiffany was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery. The evidence, including her taped interviews and ATM footage, was overwhelming. Tiffany Cole was sentenced to death, making her one of the few women on Florida's death row. She later appealed and her sentence was reviewed multiple times. But as of now, she's still awaiting execution. Her co-defendants also faced harsh sentences. Michael Jackson was sentenced to death. Alan Wade got death too. Bruce Nixon, the one who cooperated with police and showed them where the bodies were buried, got 45 years in exchange for his testimony. Today, Tiffany Cole sits on death row at Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida. Her case continues to shock people, not just because of how violent it was, but because it came from someone the victims had once trusted. Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony was a 22-year-old single mother living in Orlando, Florida, with her parents and her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. To most people, they seemed like a normal family. Kaylee was a happy, playful child, and her grandparents adored her. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they looked. Casey had a history of lying, partying, and constantly clashing with her parents. In 2008, her life, and Kaylee's, would become the center of one of the most shocking cases in America. In mid-June 2008, Kaylee suddenly disappeared, but it wasn't reported right away. In fact, no one outside the family even knew she was missing until a whole month later. On July 15th, Casey's mother, Cindy Anthony, called 911 and said something terrifying, that her granddaughter had been missing for 31 days. And her daughter's car smelled like there had been a dead body inside. Casey told police that Kaylee wasn't her nanny, named Zenediah Fernandez Gonzalez, but when police investigated, they found out the woman didn't exist. Casey had made her up. As they questioned her further, the lies just kept piling up. She said she worked at Universal Studios, but when officers took her there, she finally admitted she hadn't worked there in years. Detectives quickly began to suspect that Casey knew far more than she was saying. Then, in December 2008, 6 months after Kaylee vanished, a utility worker discovered the small skeletal remains in a wooded area near the Anthony family home. It was Kaylee. A medical examiner couldn't determine the exact cause of death, but duct tape was found around her skull, suggesting foul play. Casey was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial began in May 2011 and lasted 6 weeks. Prosecutors claimed Casey had killed Kaylee because she wanted to live a carefree life without the burden of motherhood. They showed pictures of Casey out partying during the month Kaylee was missing. They also revealed internet searches from the family computer for terms like chloroform and how to make weapons. But Casey's defense team gave the jury a different story. They argued that Kaylee accidentally drowned in the family pool, and that Casey's father, George Anthony, helped cover it up. They said that Casey's strange behavior was due to years of trauma and abuse. George denied those claims, but the defense never had to prove their story, only raised enough doubts. On July 5th, 2011, the verdict shook the country. Casey Anthony was found not guilty of murder, manslaughter, and child abuse. She was only convicted of lying to the police and was released shortly after. The public was outraged. Many people believed she had gotten away with killing her own child, but in the eyes of the law, there wasn't enough evidence to convict her. Since then, Casey has lived mostly out of the public eye, though she's made a few attempts to speak out or start over. Gypsy Rose. For years, Gypsy Rose Blanchard lived under the care of a mother who claims she was severely ill. But nothing was what it seemed. And when her mother was found murdered, Gypsy's secret life and the abuse she suffered came into full view. For years, Gypsy Rose was portrayed as severely ill child suffering from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, seizures, and developmental delays. Her mother, Didi Blanchard, was her full-time caregiver and spokesperson. The pair received donations, a free house from Habitat for Humanity, and even trips to Disney World. But there was one huge problem. Gypsy wasn't sick at all. Didi had been faking Gypsy's illness for years, forcing her to use a wheelchair and feeding her medications she didn't need. This condition is known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a form of abuse where a caregiver fabricates or causes illness in someone for attention and sympathy. As Gypsy grew older, she began to realize the truth and wanted out. In June 2015, police found Didi Blanchard stabbed to death in her bed. At first, Gypsy was feared kidnapped, but days later, she was found safe with her boyfriend Nicholas Goodjohn in Wisconsin. The story quickly unraveled. In June 2015, police found Didi Blanchard stabbed to death in her bed. At first, Gypsy was feared kidnapped, but days later, she was found safe with her secret boyfriend Nicholas Goodjohn in Wisconsin. The story quickly unraveled. Gypsy had convinced Nicholas, who she met online, to help her kill her mother so she could finally escape. He carried out the stabbing while Gypsy waited in the other room. Together, they fled across state lines, but their online trail led police straight to them. Gypsy's arrest shocked the public. How could a girl who looked so weak and innocent be involved in a murder? But as investigators dug deeper, they discovered the years of abuse, the unnecessary surgeries, and the psychological control Didi had over her daughter. Gypsy cooperated fully with authorities. Her defense argued that while she took part in planning the murder, she was a victim of extreme abuse and manipulation. She eventually pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Nicholas Goodjohn went to trial and was sentenced to life without parole. Gypsy began serving her sentence in 2016. Behind bars, she began to live more freely than she ever had. She learned to walk without assistance, stopped taking unneeded medications, and started speaking out about her past. In late 2023, after serving 8 years, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was granted parole and released early. Jennifer Mee. Jennifer Mee was once known as the Hiccup Girl. At just 15, she made national headlines for having uncontrollable hiccups, over 50 times a minute, that doctors couldn't explain. She went viral before viral was even a thing, appearing on the Today Show and other major outlets. But just a few years later, Jennifer was back in the headlines, this time for murder. And the bubbly teen America once rooted for had turned into a convicted killer. In October 2010, Jennifer Mee was 19 years old and living in St. Petersburg, Florida. She had moved from her hiccup fame and was now hanging out with a rough crowd. That's when she got involved in a robbery plan that quickly turned deadly. Jennifer met a man named Shannon Griffin, 22 years old, through social media. She invited him to come meet her late at night, suggesting they might hang out. What Shannon didn't know was that he was being set up. When he arrived, Jennifer led him into a trap. Two of her male friends, Lamont Newton and Laron Rayford, were waiting in the shadows. They pulled a gun on Shannon and tried to rob him. But things went wrong, fast. Shannon fought back, and during the struggle, he was shot and killed. The plan had been to steal his money, but now they were facing murder. It didn't take long for police to figure out what happened. Jennifer admitted in a taped interview that she had lured Shannon to the spot, knowing her friends planned to rob him. She said she didn't expect him to be killed, but by law, that didn't matter. Florida's felony murder rule says that if someone dies during a robbery, everyone involved can be charged with murder, even if they didn't pull the trigger. Jennifer was arrested along with both men. Sadly, the former Hiccup Girl was facing a first-degree murder charge. At trial, Jennifer's defense team argued that she didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. They said she was young, naive, and being manipulated by older guys. The prosecutors pointed to her taped confession and the fact that she was the one who set the entire thing in motion. They told the jury that without Jennifer, the robbery wouldn't have happened, and if the robbery hadn't happened, Shannon Griffin would still be alive. The jury didn't take long to decide. In 2013, Jennifer Mee was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She's now serving her time at Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida, a same prison where several other high-profile female offenders are held. Jennifer still claims she didn't mean for anyone to die, but the law didn't see it that way, and neither did the jury. Amanda Knox thought she was starting the adventure of a lifetime, studying abroad in Italy, living with new roommates. But within weeks, she'd thrust into a nightmare that would follow her for years. When her roommate Meredith Kircher was found murdered in the shared apartment, Amanda quickly went from witness to suspect to headline. The case became a global media frenzy, filled with twists, false confessions, and shocking claims of a game gone wrong. In 2007, 20-year-old British student Meredith Kircher was studying abroad in Perugia, Italy, when she was found brutally murdered in the apartment she shared with Amanda Knox. Meredith had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Amanda, a 20-year-old American student, had only known Meredith for a few weeks, but they were roommates. The scene was gruesome. There were signs of a struggle, and the room was locked from the inside. Amanda claimed she had spent the night at her boyfriend, Rafael Solicito's place, but her behavior raised red flags. She was seen kissing him outside the crime scene and reportedly did cartwheels at the police station, which made her seem disturbingly unaffected by the murder. Amanda and Rafael were arrested shortly after. During a long and chaotic interrogation, Amanda initially implicated herself and even accused her boss, Patrick Luombo, of the murder, an accusation that was later proven false. She said she had been confused, scared, and pressured during questioning. Eventually, Italian police arrested Rudy Gude, whose DNA was found all over the crime scene and who later admitted to being there. But despite this, Amanda and Rafael were still charged and tried for Meredith's murder. Amanda's trial became a media circus. The prosecution painted her as a manipulative femme fatale, accusing her of a twisted scheme gone wrong. The tabloids called her Foxy Knoxy, but the defense argued that the evidence was weak and largely circumstantial. There were no solid proof placing Amanda at the crime scene during the murder. Yet, in 2009, she and Rafael were found guilty. The courtroom erupted. Amanda was sentenced to 26 years and Rafael got 25, but the case didn't end there. In 2011, an appeals court overturned their convictions, citing major flaws in the DNA evidence. Amanda was released after spending 4 years in an Italian prison. She returned to the US and tried to move on, but Italy's justice system wasn't done yet. In a dramatic twist, her convictions were reinstated in 2014, only to be thrown out again in 2015 by Italy's highest court, which finally cleared Amanda and Rafael once and for all. Katherine Magbanua. Katherine Magbanua wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. She wasn't even at the scene. But prosecutors said she helped connect all the pieces. Katherine found herself in the middle of a murder-for-hire plot that took down a respected law professor and exposed deep family secrets, jealousy, and money. The victim was Don Merkel, a well-known law professor at Florida State University in Tallahassee. He was shot and killed in his own driveway on July 18, 2014, after returning home from dropping off his kids. It was a shocking, broad daylight murder in an upscale neighborhood. At first, the police had no idea who did it. There was no signs of robbery, and it felt targeted, like someone wanted him gone. The investigation took years, but slowly the truth started to unravel. Dan had been going through a bitter custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendy Adelson. The divorce had gotten ugly, and Wendy's family, especially her mother and brother, were deeply involved. Wendy wanted to move the kids to South Florida to be closer to her family, but Dan said no. and the courts sided with him. Prosecutors would later argue that Wendy's family was so desperate to get rid of Dan, they helped arrange his murder. And that's where Katherine Magbanua came in. Katherine was dating Charlie Adelson, Wendy's wealthy and flashy brother. At the same time, she had 2 kids with another man, Sigfredo Garcia, a known gang member. According to prosecutors, Charlie used Katherine to hire Sigfredo and his friend, Luis Rivera, to carry out the murder. She was accused of being the go-between, the one who connected the Adelson family to the 2 hitmen. Phone records, cash deposits, and even suspicious texts all pointed back to her. In October 2016, 2 years after Dan was killed, Garcia and Rivera were arrested and charged with his murder. A few months later, in 2017, Katherine was arrested too. The first time Katherine went to trial in 2019, the jury couldn't agree. It ended in a mistrial. The prosecutors weren't done. They tried her again in 2022, and this time, the evidence stuck. Rivera had already taken a plea deal and testified that he and Garcia were paid $100,000 to kill Don Merkel. He claimed Katherine was the one who arranged everything, giving them the details, the payment, and helping clean things up afterward. Prosecutors showed that Katherine had no stable job at the time, but suddenly had a lot of cash coming in after the murder. And her phone record showed calls between her and Charlie Adelson shortly before after Dan was killed. In May 2022, Katherine Magbanua was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 2 additional 30-year sentences. Her ex-boyfriend, Sigfredo Garcia, is also serving a life sentence, and Luis Rivera got 19 years for cooperating. Charlie Adelson was finally arrested in 2022 as well, and he's now awaiting trial, accused of being the one who ordered the hit. Katherine still claims she's innocent, but to the jury and the Dan Merkel's family, the evidence told a very different story. Jodi Arias. When police found Travis Alexander brutally murdered in his shower, he had been stabbed nearly 30 times, his throat was slit from ear to ear, and he had a gunshot wound to the head. His ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias, claimed she wasn't even there. Then she said masked intruders did it. Then finally she admitted she killed him, but it was self-defense. What followed became one of the most watched trials in US history and one of the most disturbing. Travis Alexander was a 30-year-old motivational speaker living in Mesa, Arizona. He was popular, well-liked, and deeply involved in his Mormon faith. He had briefly dated Jodi Arias, a woman he met at a work event. Their relationship was passionate but also toxic and on again, off again. On June 4th, 2008, Travis missed a conference call and he didn't show up to a planned trip. Concerned friends went to his house and found a horrifying scene. His body was in the shower, decomposing, with multiple stab wounds, a deep neck cut, and a gunshot wound to the temple. Jodi Arias told police she hadn't seen him in weeks, but digital evidence said otherwise. Police found a camera in Travis's washing machine. Inside were photos of Travis and Jodi from the day of the murder. Even more shocking, the camera had accidental photos showing Travis bleeding and even an image of Jodi's foot and a pool of blood. Confronted with the evidence, Jodi changed her story several times. First, she wasn't there, then 2 intruders killed Travis. Finally, she admitted she killed him, but said it was in self-defense after he attacked her. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial began in 2013 and quickly gained national attention. Jodi took the stand for 18 days, something rarely seen in a high-profile murder trials. She gave graphic testimony about her relationship with Travis, claiming he was physically abusive and manipulative behind closed doors. The prosecution, however, painted Jodi as a jealous ex who couldn't handle rejection. Travis had planned a trip with another woman and told his friends he was done with Jodi. The state argued she drove 1,000 miles, had sex with him, then murdered him in cold blood. After months of testimony, the jury found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder. In the sentencing phase, the jury couldn't agree on the death penalty, so she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 2015. Amelia Carr. Amelia Carr came from a troubled background, but no one expected her life to spiral into something this dark. By her mid-20s, she was already a mother of 4, but also angry, jealous, and caught in a deadly love triangle. In 2009, Amelia took part in a crime so disturbing that it shocked even veteran detectives in Florida. She didn't just help kill someone, she helped bury a woman alive. The case began in Ocala, Florida in early 2009. Amelia Carr had once been engaged to a man named Joshua Folkham, but the relationship ended badly. Joshua eventually married another woman, Heather Strong, who became the mother of his children. Amelia was furious, and that anger only grew when she and Joshua started secretly seeing each other again. What made things worse? A nasty custody battle. Joshua and Heather were fighting for their 2 kids, and Amelia wanted to see Heather gone. On February 15th, 2009, Heather disappeared. Just days before, she filed a restraining order against Joshua, saying she feared for her life. Unfortunately, that warning came too late. According to prosecutors, Amelia and Joshua lured Heather to a trailer, tied her to a chair, and interrogated her about the custody case. Amelia then helped Joshua stuff Heather into a storage bin, where they both watched her suffocate to death. Then, they buried her body behind Amelia's mother's house, covering it with cement blocks. At first, both Amelia and Joshua acted like they didn't know where Heather had gone, but police were suspicious. Heather's last known location tracked back to them, and when investigators dug deeper, their stories started falling apart. Eventually, both were arrested. The turning point came when Amelia confessed during a taped jailhouse conversation, admitting that she helped plan the murder and stood by while it happened. She claimed it was Joshua who killed Heather, but her involvement couldn't be denied. Amelia was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Prosecutors described her as manipulative, jealous, and cruel. They told the jury that Amelia could have stopped it at any time, but she didn't. Instead, she wants the mother of 2 die slowly, then helped bury her like trash. Her defense tried to paint her as the victim of Joshua, someone abused, controlled, and pushed to the edge, but the jury didn't buy it. Her taped confession and actions after the murder were too much to ignore. In 2010, Amelia Carr was convicted of murder. Amelia Carr was originally sentenced to death, making her the 3rd woman on Florida's death row at the time. But in 2017, her sentence was reduced to life in prison after new laws changed how Florida handles death penalty cases. She is now serving that life sentence without parole. Karla Homolka. Karla Homolka appeared to be the perfect wife, but behind closed doors, she and her husband committed crimes so disturbing they shocked all of Canada. And when the truth came out, her involvement in her own sister's death made the story even more darker. In the early 1990s, Karla Homolka and her husband, Paul Bernardo, were behind some of the most disturbing crimes in Canadian history. Paul was already known for sexually assaulting women who were in Toronto, but when he met Karla, the crimes escalated. Together, they kidnapped, drugged, and assaulted at least 3 young women. One of them was Karla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy. In a horrific twist, Karla helped Paul drug Tammy with animal tranquilizers from her workplace. Tammy lost consciousness and later died during the assault on Christmas Eve, 1990. Karla told authorities it was an accident. No one suspected the truth. In 1993, after 2 more victims, Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, were found murdered, Paul was arrested. The same year, Karla struck a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for testifying against them, she received just 12 years in prison. She portrayed herself as a victim of Paul's control, claiming she was forced to participate out of fear. But shortly after her deal was signed, police uncovered videotapes from Paul and Karla's home, videos showing Karla willingly participating in the crimes. But it was too late. Her deal was already in place. Paul Bernardo's trial was separate, and the tapes became central evidence. They showed the brutal reality. Karla was not just a passive bystander. She laughed during the assaults. She helped plan them. She even coached some of the victims. Paul was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. He was later declared a dangerous offender, which meant he'd likely never be released. She served her sentence quietly, and despite public outrage, the law couldn't touch her further. Karla was released from prison in 2005 after serving the full 12 years of her sentence. She changed her name, married, and eventually had children. Her release sparked national debate and public protests. Many believed she got away with murder. To this day, Karla Homolka is one of Canada's most hated figures. Her polite courtroom smile and quiet voice couldn't erase the horrors she helped commit. And her freedom remains one of the country's most haunting legal outcomes. Denise Williams. Denise Williams appeared to be a quiet, church-going woman, a dedicated mother, and a grieving widow. For nearly 2 decades, she lived without suspicion. But in 2018, her picture-perfect image shattered when investigators uncovered a murder-for-hire plot that had been buried for 17 years. And at the center of it all, a twisted love triangle with her best friend's husband. The story begins back in December 2000 when Denise's husband, Mike Williams, went missing while duck hunting on Lake Seminole in Florida. At first, everyone assumed it was a tragic accident. His boat was found, but there were no signs of him. Authorities believe he had drowned and been eaten by alligators, a heartbreaking theory many accepted at the time. Denise collected $1.75 million in life insurance and eventually moved on, but the truth was far darker than anyone imagined. Years passed and rumors never stopped. People close to Mike felt something wasn't right. Then in 2017, the case finally broke open, and what came out shocked the entire state of Florida. In 2017, Brian Winchester, Mike's best friend and the man Denise eventually married, confessed to the killing. But he didn't come forward out of guilt. He was trying to avoid prison as a separate kidnapping case involving Denise. In his confession, Brian said Denise had helped plan Mike's murder. They were having an affair while she was still married to Mike. Denise didn't want a divorce, didn't want to share custody, and didn't want her reputation ruined. So instead, she and Brian came up with a plan to kill him. On the morning of the hunting trip, Brian pushed Mike into the water, expecting him to drown. But Mike survived. So Brian shot him in the face and buried his body near Carr Lake. For 17 years, Brian and Denise kept the secret. They eventually got married, but the relationship fell apart. And when Denise tried to leave him, Brian snapped and later held her at gunpoint. That led to his arrest, which eventually brought the truth to light. With Brian's confession and immunity deal in place, Denise was arrested in 2018 and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and being an accessory after the fact. She pled not guilty. During her trial, Brian took the stand and described the entire plot, how they planned it together, how he killed Mike, and how they covered it up for years. Denise's defense argued that Brian acted alone and was blaming her to avoid prison, but the jury didn't buy it. In December 2018, Denise Williams was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder and received additional time for the other charges. Mike's body had been found the year before, buried near a boat landing where Brian said it would be. After nearly 2 decades of lies, the truth finally came out, and Denise, once seen as a grieving widow, was now exposed as a cold, calculated killer.
Diane Downs. When Diane Downs rushed her children to the hospital, claiming a stranger had shot them, her story shocked the town. But as investigators looked closer, they began to uncover a motive and a mother capable of unimaginable violence. On May 19, 1983, Diane Downs arrived at a hospital in Springfield, Oregon, with her 3 children, 8-year-old Christy, 7-year-old Cheryl, and 3-year-old Danny. All had been shot at close range. Cheryl was already dead. Christy and Danny were clinging to life. Diane had a minor gunshot wound on her left arm. She told police she had been carjacked by a stranger who flagged her down, demanded her car, and opened fire on the family. But the story didn't make sense. Her car showed no signs of struggle, there were no blood on the driver's side, and Diane's behavior, cold and strange. She seemed more concerned about her car's interior than her dying kids. Even staff at the hospital said something felt off. Investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies. Witnesses saw Diane driving slowly to the hospital when her kids were bleeding to death in the back seat. The murder weapon, a .22 caliber gun, was linked to a gun Diane had once owned. And most damning of all, police uncovered the motive. Diane was obsessed with a married man who didn't want children. She had told her friends that her kids were ruining her relationship. Eventually, her surviving daughter Christy, who had suffered a stroke during the shooting, found the strength to speak. And when she did, she said the unthinkable. "My mom shot us." At her 1984 trial, prosecutors painted Diane as narcissistic, cold, and dangerous. She showed almost no emotion as witnesses described the horror of that night. In fact, she often smiled in court, played with her hair, and seemed more interested in how she looked than on what she'd done. Diane claimed she was innocent, that she was being framed. But the evidence stacked high. Ballistics matched the bullets to a gun she had access to. Christie's testimony sealed it. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. Diane Downs was found guilty of murder, attempted murder, and assault. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years, with no possibility of parole for decades. But even behind bars, she didn't stop. In 1987, she escaped from prison and remained on the run for 10 days before being caught and transferred to a more secure facility. Her surviving children, Christy and Danny, were later adopted by the lead prosecutor and given a new life.
Misty Croslin. Most people wouldn't expect a 17-year-old girl to be at the center of Florida's most talked about missing child cases. But Misty Croslin wasn't just any teenager. She was the last known person to see 5-year-old Haley Cummings alive. What started as a routine night of babysitting would turn Misty's life upside down, leave a trail of questions that still haven't been answered. It was the night of February 9, 2009. Misty was staying at the home of her boyfriend, Ronald Cummings, watching his 2 young kids while he worked overnight. Everything seemed normal until the next morning, when Misty called 911 just before 3:30 a.m. to report that little Haley was missing from her bed. There were no signs of breaking. Misty told police she had put the kids to sleep, but when she woke up, Haley was gone. At first, it was treated as a possible abduction, but soon, investigators noticed inconsistencies in Misty's story. She changed her timeline more than once, and her emotional reaction didn't seem to match the seriousness of the situation. As the days went on, Misty became the focus of the investigation. Detectives believed she knew more than she was saying, but without hard proof or a confession, they couldn't charge her. Haley's case remained unsolved, and Misty continued to deny any involvement. Nearly a year later, in January 2010, Misty was back in the news, but this time, it had nothing to do with the missing girl. She was arrested during a major undercover drug operation along with Ronald Cummings and others. Misty had been caught on camera selling prescription pills. She was involved in multiple deals over several days. Police said it was one of the biggest drug stings in that part of Florida in years. Many people thought the arrest might finally lead to answers about what happened to Haley. Investigators hoped Misty would open up in exchange for a lighter sentence, but that never happened. She stood by her original story. Misty went to trial facing multiple drug trafficking charges. Her defense argued that she was young, inexperienced, and being used by older men who took advantage of her. Misty said she didn't fully understand what she was doing and felt pressure to go along with the drug deals. But prosecutors didn't agree. They played recordings of her setting up deals and handing out her pills. The court said she was old enough to know what she was doing, and that the amount of drugs involved was too serious to ignore. In 2011, Misty Croslin was sentenced to 25 years in prison. It was a shocking sentence for someone still in her teens, and some people felt it was too harsh. Today, Misty is still behind bars, and Haley Cummings is still missing. Misty had never been charged in connection with the girl's disappearance, but many believe she knows more than she had ever admitted. Rebecca Fenton. Rebecca Fenton always claimed she was just a wife, not a killer. She lived in a nice home, drove a sports car, and seemed to have a stable marriage. But in 2008, her husband was found shot to death in their Florida home, and for years, Rebecca said she had nothing to do with it. She stuck to that story until the very end, even after the jury didn't believe her. It happened on Super Bowl Sunday, February 3rd, 2008. Rebecca and her husband, Larry Fenton, had just moved into a new house in Clearwater, Florida. That day, Rebecca said she went out for a jog. When she came back, she claimed she found Larry dead, lying on the floor with 5 gunshot wounds, including one to the head. There were no signs of forced entry, no robbery, and nothing taken from the house. Police immediately thought it was strange. Larry had no known enemies, and while Rebecca looked upset, her story didn't quite add up. She said she found him and called 911. But when police arrived, she had already changed her clothes, and her behavior felt oddly calm for someone who had just discovered their husband murdered. At first, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest her, but detectives kept looking. They noticed that Rebecca's phone records and behavior before and after the murder seemed suspicious. Most importantly, gunshot residue was found later on the inside of the clothes she had worn that day. Investigators also uncovered that Rebecca and Larry had been having marriage issues. Larry was planning to end the relationship, and she stood to gain financially from his life insurance. It took 4 years, but in 2011, police arrested Rebecca Fenton and charged her with first-degree murder. In 2015, Rebecca finally went to trial. Prosecutors painted her as cold and calculated. They argued that she shot Larry, cleaned herself up, changed her clothes, and then staged the scene to make it look like someone else had done it. The defense said there were no murder weapons found, and no one could replace Rebecca at the exact moment of shooting happened. They claimed that the case was built on circumstantial evidence, and pointed to the fact that it took years to even charge her. But the gunshot residue, the life insurance motive, and her inconsistent behavior were enough for the jury. Rebecca Fenton was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. To this day, she still says she's innocent. In interviews from prison, she insists that someone else killed her husband and that she's the victim of wrongful conviction. But jurors and investigators say the evidence told a different story. Rebecca is currently serving her sentence in Florida's women's prison, and even now, she hasn't changed her version of events, even though no one else believes it.